Elizabethan exploration is often seen as the beginning of England's rise as a global power. During Elizabeth's reign, adventurers travelled across the Atlantic, into the Americas, around the world, and eventually into Asia. They were driven by a range of motivations. Many sought wealth, especially gold and spices. Others aimed to find new trade routes, such as the Northwest Passage, which would allow England to trade directly with Asia. There was also a strong desire to build an empire and challenge Spain, which dominated global trade at the time. Spain had a huge empire and controlled large amounts of South America, known then as the New World. However, success in exploration does not always mean success in trade. Some voyagers brought back treasure, others gathered knowledge, and many failed completely. So throughout we must ask, did they achieve their aims, and did they actually increase trade across the world? Before exploration even began, England needed a clear purpose and vision, and this came from John Dee. Dee was a mathematician, astronomer, and advisor to Elizabeth. He argued that England should build a British empire to compete with Spain, who were becoming extremely wealthy through overseas colonies and trade. He also contributed to developments in navigation and improving maps and sailing techniques. This made long-distance voyages more realistic. This meant Dee was highly influential in shaping exploration. However, he did not travel or establish trade routes himself. So his importance lies in influence rather than direct success. He laid the intellectual foundations for exploration, which we refer to as imperial ambitions, a country's desire to build an empire by gaining power, land, and influence in other parts of the world. Knowledge check. Why was John Dee important? Pause the video and write your answer. Answer. He inspired exploration and helped develop navigation, encouraging others to explore. He had the vision of a British Empire, the imperial ambition. Francis Drake is one of the most famous Elizabethan adventurers, and in many ways one of the most successful. But mainly in terms of wealth and conflict rather than trade. Drake's voyage between 1577 and 1580 took him around the world, making him the first Englishman to achieve circumnavigation. Aboard his ship called the Golden Hind, he sailed down the west coast of South America, targeting Spanish ports in regions such as Chile and Peru, where Spain controlled vast quantities of silver from the New World. During his voyage, Drake captured Spanish ships with full support from the Queen, including large amounts of silver and gold. When he returned to England, the profits were enormous, so much so that investors made huge returns and Elizabeth herself benefited financially. He also claimed land in California, naming it the New Albion, although this did not lead to permanent settlement. This meant Drake was extremely successful in achieving his aims. He gained wealth, weakened Spain, and demonstrated that England could operate on a global scale. He came home to a hero's welcome and was knighted by Elizabeth. However, his impact on trade was limited. He did not establish trade routes or colonies, and his actions focused on raiding existing trading networks and Spanish treasure ships, rather than building new ones. So overall, Drake was highly successful in terms of wealth, fame, and exploration. So knowledge check. Was Drake more successful in wealth or trade? Explain your answer. Pause the video and have a go at answering this question. So, answer. Wealth, because he captured the Spanish treasure ships in the New World rather than building trade routes. Humphrey Gilbert focused on two major aims: finding the Northwest Passage and establishing colonies in North America. Gilbert was a strict Protestant and viewed Spain as a dangerous Catholic country. The Northwest Passage was believed to be a route through North America to Asia. If found, it would allow England to access valuable goods like spices in Asia more quickly and avoid Spanish-controlled routes. In 1583, Gilbert claimed Newfoundland for England, which was an important symbolic step in establishing overseas territory. However, he failed to establish a permanent colony, did not find the Northwest Passage, and drowned on the return journey. This meant he failed to achieve his main aims and had no impact on trade. His expedition highlights how difficult and dangerous early exploration was. Knowledge check. What was the Northwest Passage? Pause the video and write an answer to this question. Your answer should include something like this: a route to markets in Asia through North America to make trade quicker and cheaper and to avoid the Spanish Empire in South America. Walter Raleigh. Walter Raleigh had some of the most ambitious aims of all Elizabethan explorers. He wanted to establish colonies in North America, find gold in South America, and create bases that could be used to attack Spanish ships from. The Roanoke expedition was England's first attempt to establish a permanent colony in North America, organised by Walter Raleigh. Beginning in 1585, it aimed to create a colony called Virginia, after Elizabeth the Virgin Queen, to challenge Spanish power. Raleigh did not go himself. Instead, two leaders were sent called Richard Grenville and Ralph Lane. These led the first expedition there. However, the settlers faced serious problems. Roanoke was very isolated. There were food shortages and poor relations with the local indigenous groups, the Algonquian people, led them to abandon the colony in 1586. A second group, led by John White in 1587, attempted to establish a new settlement, but when White returned from England as he was there getting supplies, the colony had disappeared. This became known as the Lost Colony. In 1595, he also travelled to Guyana in South America, exploring the Orinoco River in search of El Dorado, the legendary city of gold, but found nothing. Although Raleigh's Guyana expedition failed to achieve its aims of finding gold, it helped expand geographical knowledge of the area and encouraged further colonisation attempts. This contributed to the eventual success of the first English colony, called Jamestown, in 1607. This is 4 years after Elizabeth's death in 1603, highlighting how Elizabethan exploration had limited short-term success but greater long-term impact. Knowledge check. So you've got 4 questions there to have a go at. So pause the video and attempt those 4 questions. Here are your answers. Pause the video and check you have got the correct answers for each question. Ralph Fitch. Ralph Fitch represents a different type of explorer, one focused on trade in the East rather than colonisation in America. In 1583, he travelled to the East carrying letters from the Queen to foreign rulers, including the Mughal Emperor. These letters were intended to support English merchants and establish trading connections. Fitch travelled through the Middle East to India, visiting important cities such as Agra and Bengal within the Mughal Empire. He then continued to Southeast Asia, including Malacca, which was one of the most important centres of the spice trade. During his journey, Fitch carefully observed trade routes, markets and goods. He recorded detailed information about spices, textiles and trade that operated across Asia. Although he did not establish trade himself, his knowledge was extremely valuable. His reports later helped inspire the creation of the East India Company. So Fitch achieved his aim of gathering knowledge, but his impact on trade was long-term rather than immediate. Knowledge check. Why was Fitch's impact long-term? Pause the video and write your answer. Answer. Because he gathered knowledge that was used later to develop trade. James Lancaster. So James Lancaster represents a turning point in Elizabethan exploration. In 1600, Elizabeth granted a charter to the East India Company, allowing English merchants to trade in Asia. In 1601, Lancaster led its first successful voyage. He sailed around the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa, crossed the Indian Ocean and reached Bantam in Java, Indonesia, where he established a trading base, the East India Company. The company called this as it focused on trade in the East Indies, so Indonesia, India and the surrounding areas. This allowed England to trade directly with Asia, particularly in valuable spices such as pepper and cloves. The East India Company would later become one of the most powerful trading organisations in the world. But most of this success came after Elizabeth's death in 1603. So while Lancaster achieved his aims and increased trade, this success was limited in scale during Elizabeth's reign. Knowledge check. So here are 4 questions to have a go at. Pause the video and try and answer those. Here are the answers. Again, pause the video and double check your answers are correct. Trade and evaluation. So, how far were Elizabethan adventurers successful in increasing trade across the world? So there is strong evidence to challenge the statement. Many Elizabethan expeditions failed or achieved only limited success. For example, attempts at colonisation such as Roanoke failed, meaning no lasting trade links were established in North America during Elizabeth's reign. In addition, some explorers such as Ralph Fitch did gain valuable knowledge about trade routes in Asia. However, this did not immediately increase trade. Instead, the impact of this knowledge was only seen later, meaning there was no short-term success. There is some evidence to support the statement. James Lancaster's voyage in 1601 did establish England's first direct trade links with Asia through the East India Company. This allowed England to begin trading for valuable goods such as spices. However, even this success was limited. It took place in only one part of the world and occurred very late in Elizabeth's reign, meaning it does not prove widespread success. So overall, they were successful to an extent. Wealth increased and trade began to develop, but it was limited and not fully established during Elizabeth's reign. So final judgment on overall success. Elizabethan explorers were successful to a certain extent in achieving their aims, but success varied depending on the goal. Explorers like Francis Drake were highly successful in gaining wealth, attacking Spain, and proving global exploration through circumnavigation. Meanwhile, Humphrey Gilbert and Walter Raleigh largely failed in their aims of colonisation and finding new routes such as a Northwest Passage, as their settlements did not last and new trade routes were not discovered. Ralph Fitch was successful in gathering knowledge about Asia, while James Lancaster achieved some success in establishing early trade links in Asia. Overall, while some aims like wealth and exploration were achieved, others, such as colonization and widespread trade, were much less successful, meaning their overall success was limited.